Hello and welcome to the Six Sales podcast. This is Mike Nicholson from Six Sales. Today we're going to be speaking about retail media. Before we start though, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Lumen Research, the sponsors of this podcast. For those that don't know, Lumen Research are an eye tracking technology company that are helping brands to plan, buy, measure and optimize towards real human attention. And we even have Mike Follett from Lumen Research on this episode. Welcome, Mike. And Nick Ashley from Tesco. Nick, welcome. Welcome back.
Mike.
As I was just saying, off air there, Mike, you're the most watched episode of the Six Sales podcast on YouTube alongside Anders from Brand Metrics. And Nick, I saw your face on Christmas Day on my Spotify Wrap because you were the most listened to on Spotify. So Clash of the Titans as it relates to
box
the Six Sales
office
podcast.
Magic,
Massive box office magic. Yes, indeed. So we're going to talk about retail media. I felt that we could have had about 3 episodes of the podcast last time we spoke. We barely scratched the surface. So very excited about this. Before we start though, there's as with anything relatively new, if we can even call it relatively new anymore, but there's lots of different definitions. You speak to different people and they have a different idea. So how do you and Tesco think about retail media? What is it to you?
So just in case any of your listeners don't know, Tesco Media Insight Platform is Tesco's retail media network. We describe it as an opportunity for brands to work with us to use either our data and or our owned assets, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute, to communicate to their customers. I mean, it's as simple as that. We actually have multiple channels that we have available for people to use for marketing, but to make it simple, we break it down into 3. So the first is what we call on-site. So that's advertising on our web and app. So that typically is sponsored products, very similar to Google search results on Tesco.com, but also display advertising. We recently launched video advertising within that particular ecosystem as well. So you have on-site. You then have off-site, which is where brands can take our data, can work with us to build audiences that are appropriate for their brand objectives. We then match that data segment with a publisher. So, for example, we have partnerships with ITV, with Sky, with the Trade Desk, with Meta, and then that segment is targeted on that particular platform. And then what we're probably going to talk about mostly today is what we call the connected store. So that is any in-store marketing. 85% of Tesco sales and most grocery retail is still through the in-store environment. So it's really, really important for brand growth. And perhaps as we talk through, I'll talk through how we're evolving that particular proposition. So those 3 buckets are probably the most simple way to think about it. Okay,
wonderful. Thank you. And also we're going to talk about the research that you did with, so Tesco Media Insights did with JCDecaux and Lumen Research today. What were the objectives of that research? What were you trying to find out?
So as I mentioned, we have invested a lot of money over the last couple of years digitizing our store network. So just to give you a couple of stats, and that's quite an expensive thing to do.
Did you pay for it?
I didn't pay for it myself, Mike. But it is an investment. It's an investment that's been worthwhile doing, and we did it for a whole load of reasons. Not actually to drive retail media and revenue is the first thing. We actually thought that it enhances the shopper experience. Our colleagues love it because our stores look better. And actually it drives category growth by doing it. So what we've done is we've installed, I think it's now 4,800 digital screens in our stores up and down the country. We also have 500 JCDecaux screens, which is a long-term partnership at the entrance to our stores. And we're in essence, we're digitizing the in-store environment to make it more adaptable, more flexible, more reactive for brands to use. So we know that it drives category uplift and sales uplift. So in stores that have digital screens, sales of the product advertised on average increase by 7%. And the broader brand portfolio by 4%. So it drives sales. But we also want to understand, does it drive brand impact as well? So we've done some research. We looked at intent and advocacy of the digital screens themselves. And we saw a really good uplift. So we saw that intent would increase by 27% and advocacy by 13%. So tough measures to shift, really, but not really typically why people are using these screens. They're using them to drive incremental sales, typically. But then as we're building more and more of these different formats within the environment, we wanted to understand what the effect of all of these different formats was together. So hence we spoke to Mike and JCDecaux, our friends there, and had a hypothesis that by using JCDecaux screens and also the digital screens within our store, there would be a multiplier effect. And that's why we started working with you.
Yeah, because I think you can see these digital screens in stores like really big shelf wobblers.
Yes.
You could see it like that in that box. You could put them into the POS, point of sale and material box, or you could remember that they're also posters.
Yeah.
And you could put them in the advertising box. Sort of and I think Tesco are world leaders in understanding the point of sale box, but they're also a media owner that just happens to own a whole load of advertising space. Which I think is one of the things we'll talk about, this sort of evolution of what the hell is advertising anyway, there. So what we wanted to do is understand how much attention do these screens get as advertising. And we've got hundreds of people to go through our environments, be exposed to advertising that we controlled, and then we track their eye movements as they walk through store, as they went through the car park, past the out of outside posters, and then in store to be exposed as well to screens that are in store as well, for a variety of brands, so we could control for the creative. And all that. And we found some really quite interesting things. One is that these are just bloody good poster sites. Often, what you have to remember about when you're buying posters off JCDecaux is that they're assuming that you're driving past them at 30 miles an hour. That's how, which is important because the viewable time.
I want to live where you live. It's all 20 miles an hour.
Yeah, exactly.
30 miles an hour.
But it means that as you're when you buy a poster, you're buying a load of viewable time. And that viewable time is 5 or 8 seconds or something like that, because that's how long it tends to drive. When you're buying a poster off Tesco, you're buying 20, 30 seconds of viewable time because you're walking up to the store. And as a result, these posters get a lot more attention than their equivalents, elsewhere. It's just really good posters there. So that's the first thing. Much more likely to be noticed, much more likely to be noticed for longer, number one. Secondly, because of the way that Tesco stores are laid out, you're much more likely to get multiple exposures. Not just seeing the things once, but twice. And because Tesco control the inventory, you know exactly that Mr. Unilever, Mr. P&G, Mr. Ella's Kitchen, they can be sure that they can be served not just one ad, but 2 or 3 or 4 as you go along. And that frequency has a big impact because you get much more attention. You get sort of a 2 + 2 effect. Seeing 2 ads actually adds up to 5, rather than 2 seconds on one, 2 seconds on another, 5 seconds in total, rather than just 2 seconds here and 2 seconds there. There's a priming or a multiplier effect on the attention itself. So these things work harder because there are multiple ads, and that doesn't matter if it's 2 outside or 2 inside or 1 outside and 1 inside. This multiplier effect goes on, whatever. And then the final thing is that they really work well as ads to get inside people's heads. You have this multiplier effect on memory as well. So there's obviously quite a range of different advertisers have, frankly, better or worse creative. Yeah. And so it's not like every single, Tesco can control a lot, but they don't get to control what goes in there. So we saw a range of results there. But what we saw consistently, time and again, is that you have this massive multiplier effect, 30% or more than you'd expect on the uplift because you've been serve multiple ads.
So what we found, which I think is quite interesting, is that one, you get higher reach. If you use both JCDecaux and digital in-store screens, you get higher reach. So there is an incremental reach driver. 2, brand recall, if you're exposed to both, is higher. So the individual component of time that you might view it is probably the same, but there is a multiplier effect. So you might see this one for 2 seconds, that one for 2 seconds, but the multiplier effect of seeing 4 definitely has an implicit impact on you. And brand recall is up to 3 times higher. as a consequence of that. And then the other thing, which was quite interesting, was if you start looking at deeper brand measures, so things like spontaneous brand awareness, which we all know is tough, or brand consideration, which is also tough, we also saw an impact there. So we're starting to see an interrelationship between these different formats that are available for people to use.
So prompted brand awareness is when, at the end of the experiment, you say, do you remember seeing a list of do you remember seeing ads from this brand or that brand? Before we ask that question, we ask a much harder question: is do you remember seeing any ads at all? Which ads do you remember at all? And that's spontaneous brand awareness. That's much, much harder to shift because people have got other things to be thinking about. And so moving that's the gold standard of what advertising is meant to do. And what's interesting about this is that this fits with a whole load of knowledge that we have about how advertising works in general, which is I find really reassuring. Last time I was on the podcast, we were with Anders Littner from Brand Metrics. We were talking about the work that we've done to analyse frequency of exposure and aggregate attention to digital advertising on like The Guardian and the Telegraph and things like that. And Brand Metrics have a whole load of spontaneous and prompted awareness data based on how many ads you've seen on those sites, and those uplifts, that multiplier effect. We did see a multiplier effect on the attention. You did get more. You didn't just get 4 seconds. You did get 4 and a bit seconds. So there is this extra attention there, but it isn't. That was a modest increase. There was a massive increase is in this spontaneous awareness, and it is. And you might say, well, you got more response because you had 2 ads. Doubled the budget, costs twice as much. But actually, the increase in the attention is massively disproportionate. You'd have to buy many more ads on a 1-by-1 basis to get the same uplifts. It's really interesting. But then when you say it out loud, you go, well, of course it works like that. It's bloody obvious.
Yeah.
And there's also different, you've done some work, haven't you? Because there are different formats within the Tesco in-store environment. So there are some which are probably more broadcast. We call them goalposts. They're visible throughout the whole store. They're probably category agnostic, so you could run any brand on it. There are some that are very specific to a given category on a gondola end, and they fulfill a different role. And the attention that people have paid to them is therefore different. Yeah. And the messaging that you need to put there is therefore different. So all of this research is really, really interesting, not just in terms of the mix of media, but also the creative messaging that you should be putting in that particular environment.
Oh, absolutely. What's really interesting, Nick, I think, is that how we've been working with Tesco. I think you are our first client. We've been in business for about 12 years. We've worked for Tesco all the time. It's fantastic. And we've worked on different bits of the Tesco business directly or in partnership with JCDecaux or whatever. At the same time, we've also been working an awful lot with publishers, digital and print publishers and TV stations. When on a publisher website, you have lots of different types of ads. You have massive great ads on the banners, or you have homepage takeovers, or you have full screen TV ads, and you use them in different ways. In store, you have equally this cornucopia of different types of ad formats that do different jobs, and I think the market is coming on to understand that all impressions are not created equal, and that's certainly the case comparing cinema and TV and digital. But all impressions are not created equal in Tesco either. Mm-hmm. You have different levels of attention and different levels of engagement. And the really crucial thing, the final thing, is that size matters a bit, but not always. For square inch of ad, those small ads right at the point of sale can get tons more attention than others. So you really have to understand.
Is that for contextual reasons, do you think?
Because people are suddenly going, oh, that's on offer. That's fantastic. Or this is organic, is it? Okay, right. And like Nick was saying, you use it in a different way. And so you have to really understand. You can't just assume it all works in the same way because it doesn't. And I think what Tesco are doing now, as they was you can see all of your stuff as point of sale, or you can see all of it as advertising, and you can flip between it and transact on that basis. I think it's really, really exciting.
I think I love this stuff, and I think the screens you're talking about, the gondola right at the end of the aisle, you've got the last frequency touch point, but also you've got recency because you see it, and then a second later you might see the product, right? But what I'm really interested in is you take your idea of sofa to store that you talked about last time you were on the podcast. So going all the way back to somebody sat on their sofa watching telly, and how you can start building the frequency and the familiarity and the brain connections at that point. And then as they start their journey towards the store that Saturday morning or whenever it may be, you see some outdoor that kind of, again, another frequency touch point, a little bit more recency towards the end goal, if you like, which is from the end goal from your point of view, is the shopping cart. And then you can just remind them right at that last minute as well, just to sort of tip them over the edge. That was the dream, I thought, like for retail media, is being able to take the brand at the top of the funnel all the way down to the poster right just before you get to the product. But how many brands are actually able to do that currently?
It's definitely changing. I mean, I think there's a myth in the industry that retail media is all about performance-driven media. And it does a bloody good job at that. Don't get me wrong. It does a really good job at driving incremental sales for brands. And that will always be its core, I think. But increasingly, it's becoming omnichannel. And we'll give you a couple of examples to try and bring it to life. So for me, it all sits with the data. And it sits with the insight that you can derive from the data. So 23 million households have a club card. As a consequence of that, the data science that you can apply to that is pretty significant. If you could say to a brand, not only can I tell you who's lapsed from your brand in the last 6 weeks, I can tell you who's most likely to lapse next. That's quite powerful. And that is not a conversation about performance. That's a conversation about how do you invest in your brand in the long term in order to prevent that lapsing happening.
Or who buys cornflakes but not Kellogg's, or to be on the front foot because they're going after people that
who's
like
most likely
products,
to
not your one.
all countless different ways that you can use these predictive driven audiences. And that, for me, is a proper conversation with a marketing director and a marketing team about how do you want to invest your brand money in the long run. And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that traditional brand building channels don't have a role to play. Of course they do. But I think brands should consider how they also match that with the role that retail media data can play as part of it. So we sort of talk about, rather than retail media being seen as a line on the plan, you should think of it as the glue that goes across your whole marketing plan, because it could fulfill a role at every different stage of it. So it could fulfill a role to sharpen your brand, all the way down to it can fulfill a role to drive some sort of performance activity. And that's why we've got these different suite of channels and opportunities that can potentially do different things depending on what a brand's looking to achieve.
But Nick, it's interesting when you talk about it, you often talk about like building audiences of people who are lapsing or something like that. And I think that comes from that sort of audience mindset of like, where are the right people and how do I find them? And so, in addition to that, I'm not conflicting with that at all. I think lots of advertisers really like this idea of understanding the model of the flow, understanding like what leads to like almost like a science experiment.
Yeah.
That how many ads do I need to show someone to get them to switch from brand A to brand B? I'll do it with Tesco, but then I'll apply the learnings to everything. I mean, one of the things I think is brilliant about Amazon, which just doesn't have the same data that you do, but is that they've sort of like they've got a TV station in Prime and they've got a supermarket and they can link the two things. I think perhaps as much as I love the guys at Amazon, you are a supermarket, but with your links to all of the to Sky or to the trade desk to get to programmatic or something, means that you can do exactly the same thing. You can go from the exposure to the result, and that learning about what it takes, that's really useful as well.
Yeah.
And it's all very well knowing how to make money, but why you're making the money, so you can do it better again and again. That's really valuable for advertisers as well.
The other important thing on this journey is we call it blended shopping. So whilst 85% of sales still take place in store, that doesn't mean that the online experience isn't having a potential role in influencing people's purchase. So we've got 1.5 million customers who we know go online, probably checking for prices, checking for deals, checking for offers, maybe looking, if it's a more expensive product, looking at a bit more of history about that particular brand or whatever. Don't purchase online.
Yeah.
And then go in store within the next 72 hours. So there is a, blurring of all of these different channels. So it's definitely not media in that channel drive sales in that channel. That's all it does. We need to think about it as a more blended journey.
Tell me this, because it's quite interesting. Like, there are going to be some people who see a TV ad and then see something online and then buy stuff on Tesco.com. And then there'll be other people, and you'll know this, people who've seen the same TV ad and then go and buy stuff in store. Is there a big difference in could you just use the digital data as a proxy for the real life data, or is the real life data adding something different, and are there different behavior patterns there?
We'll tend to find that an online shop, because people often use favourites as a way of shopping online. It's not the only way.
So less switching, perhaps.
There's often less switching. But there is. People do experiment within an online environment, but perhaps not to the same degree as in store. So
because that makes your data even more variable. Because you can't just say, oh well, someone clicked on this ad, let's pretend that's a sale, because the digital data doesn't actually predict real life behaviour, does it? Real life really is different from this digitally mediated.
Exactly, and we've also got a whole load of customers who do both. Is the reality. So it genuinely is omnichannel, and you need to understand on that sofa to store journey what roles all the different touch points can potentially play.
I was thinking because obviously Lumen have worked with lots of different media, like channels, if you say from cinema to TV to outdoor to all of the different types of channel. What would be amazing is if you could figure out what would be the optimal amount of cinema you'd need to see and TV you'd need to see and outdoor you'd need to see in order to drive the most sales once you get to the in-store or outside of the store and then in-store, and then do that versus just the in-store and see what the differences are, how brand has played a part in that.
You should go talk to John Waite at Havas. That's exactly what they're building with their meaningful media planner. And the guys at Dentsu and the guys at Publicis. They're all. This is because it's interesting. I come from a sort of, I suppose, a very contextual point of view. We don't really tend to collect lots of data about how men look at things or women look at things. It's about people looking at stuff, and if you see it on the cricket or if you see it in the football, that makes a difference. But you guys have a whole load of audience data. Mm-hmm. People in Norwich might do things differently from people in Cardiff or whatever. I think that sort of merging of the contextual with the audience data is really, I feel like the two worlds have been slightly talking separately, for ages. But now with this digital convergence, and especially the stuff you're doing with Sky and with JCDecaux, and suddenly those two worlds are coming together. It's really exciting.
There's no point in creating an audience unless you can generate some human insight from it.
Yeah.
Any good planner would tell you that, wouldn't they? So I think I 100% agree. So creation of audiences through data science is absolutely a really important thing to do, particularly when the data sets are so big. But you have to back it up with qualitative understanding of why someone might be doing that or why they're not doing that. And as a consequence, what you need to do what you could do in order to change their attitude or behaviour. So definitely a nice merger of data science and genuine human insight is really important.
So you've done TV.
Yeah.
Trade Desk, you've done programmatic. JCDecaux, post. What's next? What's next on your meet?
I think that's a. I think
that's a big. That's
quite enough to be getting on with. Thank you very much. There may well be some new partners on board over the course of this year, but I'm not going to announce what they are now. So we will definitely look to expand our offsite offering, both in terms of the data that you could use within our existing platforms, plus also potentially new partners. So you might see some of that over the course of the year.
Are you that important that making an announcement is going to impact their share price. So I can believe it. But this is market sensitive information.
But there's nothing signed and delivered yet, so I'm not going to talk about it. But there will be some more stuff, which is good. I think, as you know, Tesco is an incredibly customer first business, quite rightly so. I mean, every little helps at its heart is that. And so there is always a very, very positive, constructive discussion about the role of advertising and customer experience and how the two work together, which is why I said right at the beginning that we didn't launch digital screens to make a load of money. That wasn't the first primary role of doing it. The primary role was to enhance our customer experience and deliver more appropriate sales as a result. If you do that through advertising, then fantastic.
That's so alien concept for me. Like it's my background.
It's
made screens not to make money.
Yeah. So of course the revenue is important, but it's not. I think if you treat it as the primary driver, then you just plaster screens everywhere.
Oh yeah.
And you get it wrong. So it's about
anyone who's ever tried to drive in America will tell you what that feels like as a consumer. You can't see a thing because there's just so many outdoor ads.
So in terms of what's next is that we will always be thinking about what's right. How does advertising play a native role within the broader customer experience at Tesco? We would never put. So, for example, for years people said, "Why haven't you got video on site?" And you go, "Well,
do you really want to watch a video now?" Yeah.
We are introducing it into certain areas on the site and certain shopping behaviours. We're not going to interrupt a person's shopping journey. If we think it's additive to their shopping journey, then absolutely we'll include it. And they're quite tough decisions sometimes as to how you.
I think the screens as well. I think are good. I was back home in Cornwall. I'm from Cornwall originally, and I was back home in Cornwall, and what I've noticed is that digital screens aren't just of benefit to customers because they do look nicer, and actually they illuminate things late at night, and it's lots of additional benefits to things. It's wonderful, but it's really quite good for local producers as well, because making a poster and printing it up and putting it around, having a national campaign. But I saw local Cornish brands advertising on, A for the tourists to go, oh, Rodder's cream, that's lovely. But I'm Cornish, I like Rodder's cream, I'll have that, thank you very much. And so the advertising, the addressability of the advertising isn't just of benefit to customers, although it's also for their local.
I think that's really important. And this isn't not just Tesco. If you think about any grocer, they are pillars of the community typically, aren't they? And so we find things like with Decaux, we did some research a couple of years ago. Localization of creative, even for non-local brands, has a greater impact than not localizing it. So even simple things like including the name of the store.
Yes.
Saw an uplift. Yeah. And that's because people like to feel part of a community and locality. 100% agree. But as you say, it also makes it cost accessible.
Yeah, because you can suddenly spend 10 grand on something. You go, actually, I can afford that.
I don't have to do a national.
Yeah, exactly. And suddenly, the decline, Google and the internet in general has killed local newspapers. We don't have classifieds anymore. There's no point in reading the local advertiser. Newspapers used to be called advertiser. You'd actually get them. You pay money for them as well. And that's meant that a company like the creation of like local media is an issue, and you don't want to have national campaigns all the time. You want localized campaigns sometimes. You want the small guys to be able to compete with the big guys and to be big guys in their local areas. And I reckon that we started this discussion talking about all the media that you do, and then the hyper focus on stores, and you might think that that's almost going backwards. Aren't we all meant to be in this digital future? Aren't we all just going to have phones in our hands and boxes, and we live in our tiny boxes and have everything delivered to us? People don't want that. We are living, breathing people going out, and they enjoy going to the shops and doing stuff. And this, what I got quite excited about in this research is sort of empowering real life, not digitizing everything, not reducing everything to a phone screen. It's about taking the benefits of the phone out to the real world, and I reckon that benefits customers, I think it benefits local providers, and it sure as hell seems to be benefiting Tesco.
Yeah, we've just launched a trends report actually, and one of the trends is about small get smarter. I think it's something like 75% of growth over the last year or so within Tesco has been what you might constitute smaller brands. So they're given an opportunity to grow within that environment and doing a really good job of it. And some of that is, a lot of that is down to application of either locality or data, which allows you to be more precise. And you don't have to think about, well, how am I going to manage 3,000 stores and it's going to cost me far too much money. You can manage it in an appropriate way, as you say. So it's definitely, I think it's a really good trend that we're seeing an increase in diversity as a consequence of it.
Yeah, that shapes what Britain buys, right? The trends report that's coming out today. Well, we're recording it today, but by the time you watch this, it's already been out. So tell us a little bit more about that. What's in the report?
So it's called Shape What Britain Buys. Hopefully, you can put a link on the podcast or something. There are 6 key trends. I won't go through all of them. Maybe I'll pick out a couple of them. One is about integration, and we talk about how retail media at its worst is considered as a niche and a specialist sort of function. And of course, you need specialists who are operating it, but it is also the sort of questions that people are asking and the opportunity that it provides, we think, make it a much broader marketing question. That's why I talk about it sort of being the connective glue across a plan rather than a line on a plan. So that's one. And so how do you create a cross-functional team across your agency, across your client, across the different functions within a client, across Tesco Commercial, across Tesco Media, which is about driving growth within Tesco. And I think the media agencies have a really important role to play in that and connecting all those different teams together. So that's one of them. There's another one about small getting smarter. There's another one about what we have seen over the last year. It's obviously been pretty tough for most customers if you think about the last 3 or 4 years. The economic environment, what we have seen is a return to brands. So November 2024, 7.7 million weekly branded products were bought versus November 2023, an increase of 7.7 million. So people are going back. So if you are a brand owner and perhaps you might have lost some customers over the last couple of years, I think you should feel positive because we're definitely seeing a switch back. So that's one of them. And then measurement is another one, which is absolutely critical. So as we think about beyond ROAS, so beyond just driving sales in the moment, is how do you construct a omnichannel measurement plan, which covers lots of the areas that we talked about today, which allows you to genuinely assess the impact of retail media in the short term and in the long term. So we'll start to see things like, typically you don't find retail media integrated in things like econometrics and market mix modelling that much at the moment. Some people do it, but not that many. I think things like that, it will become part of it.
It's strange. You want to say how special this is, but also you're just another toy. There's a sort of Buzz Lightyear sort of feeling of like it's okay to be just another media, that's what I think was quite exciting about, the new tools that agencies are using that can just slot everything together rather than having these silos together. That measurement piece is it's sort of chicken and egg as well, isn't it? You need to provide the data to be a media, but the agencies and the brands need to be able to think of you as exactly that.
Yeah, I really applaud some of the agencies doing the integration on their measurement tool, and unless it's part of your day-to-day life, so the tool that you happen to be using as a planner or as a buyer, you're never going to think about it. It needs to be part of that every day. So the work that the likes of Havas are doing, I think, is really good because it's integrating data into that planning process. And if you speak to any smart planner at an agency, they get really excited about the possibilities of what you can do with the data, which I think is really interesting. So it's not just about here are a load of standard segments that I can give you that might fulfill a role, but how can we produce something that's bespoke for you and is going to address what your particular opportunity or challenge is? That leads to some really interesting conversations.
So bringing it the way back to the start again then, the research that you did with JCDecaux, Tesco and Lumen, what was your one big takeaway for marketers from that report? And then I'm going to ask the same question to you, Mike.
I think I'm going to do it in one. I'm going to do it in one or two. I might do two.
Okay, do two.
I might do
the whole
two.
research is about parity. Exactly. Two bites of the cherry.
First thing is, when you're thinking about the in-store environment, think about its longer-term role that it plays for your brand, not just whether it's going to deliver incremental sales within that 2-week period that you happen to have the advertising running, would be the first thing. And the second thing would be back to what we were saying about the mindset that a customer is in, depending on where they are in the store and what their particular mission is. And therefore think about what the messaging might be that's appropriate for those different areas. So it's not about taking an ad that you might stick on a 48 sheet or a bus shelter and putting it in store. It's absolutely not that. It's thinking about, well, what might someone be thinking at the gondola end, and what might be an appropriate message to give them. And perhaps not just sort of cutting and pasting what, across all of those different formats, because they do fulfill different roles.
Yeah. And for me, I think it's the multiplier effect thing. I know, it's interesting that recently I've come on the podcast twice, saying the same thing twice. Perhaps there's a recency. Yeah, exactly. But you have to remember that people live busy lives, and your advertising is perhaps quite low down on the priority list. So giving people 2 bites of the cherry, or 3 or 4, is important. But also realizing that memories are created over time. Within a shopping trip, we saw a couple of memories, a couple of impacts is better than one on its own, or whatever. But I think especially when you live in a retail world, you realise that this is it's one of those games that you play again and again and again. They're going to come back to the store next week. This isn't your one chance to. You have to realise that people are going to be, should be, and you should expect people to be exposed again and again and again, so that you can build up and play into that to build up memories. So this was a very limited version of that recency. The stuff that we were talking about last time was a bit more, but I think that as we learn more about retail media, we'll realise the power of repetition there, and the sort of aggregate effects of that, and of course what you need to do is work out what those effects are. I think perhaps seeing the shopping tills receipts might be quite a good judge of that.
Yeah. I really like what you said there. We haven't got time now, but for next time, maybe for part 3 of retail media with Nick, I really like that idea of the in-aisle advertising being a part of your brand campaign for the future rather than just direct response. Because I would imagine most marketers think of that as direct response, right? Yeah. It's like point of sale. Let's get it in the basket now. But that actually, if you're in the milk aisle and you see Cravendale, God knows why I came up with that brand, but why not? That might affect you down the line, but it wouldn't be measured necessarily. Because, as you say, the posters have gone. You
might have seen we did 3 or 4 store wraps last year. So the first one we did was with PepsiCo before the Champions League final, because they're an official sponsor for the Champions League. So we took our Wembley store, which is huge, Wembley Extra, and effectively did the front of the Wembley store with a PepsiCo creative. It's incredibly impactful. And that was all about brand and impact. So it can definitely, I think I'd encourage people to be creative about the way they're thinking about how their brand could show up in our environment.
It's almost like brand response. Yeah. It can work now, but for the future as well.
Definitely.
Awesome. Gents, thank you very much for being on the 6 Hours podcast. Really enjoyed it as always.
Thank you very much.